Hello and welcome to what I am tentatively calling right now my Dead by Daylight retrospective. I am the social solipsist, and um, Dead by Daylight is a video game that I feel the need to talk about. It was also requested that I give some thoughts on it. So, in the interest of getting my thoughts together, and this video isn't going to go up before the end of the year, but it was intended to. I just want to get it off of my open tabs because I've got a whole bunch of scripts open and I want this one gone. So that's what I'm doing right now. Like I said, this is sort of a review, sort of a retrospective, sort of mostly this is a combination of wanting to get it off my plate and the fact that I finally had to uninstall it because of some horrible technical issues with the updates. I'll save you the long story, but basically it comes down to I had to uninstall it about a month ago because every time it would get a small, like literally a few hundred megs update, it would take over 50 gigs in my storage to do it, additional to what it had already installed, because every time it downloaded an update, and this is a problem from the developers, not from Steam, it would unpack the entire game, write the new files into the package, and then pack it back up. So, yeah, not great. Started to piss me off. So it's officially uninstalled. However, it's been a few months even before that since I last played it, and so I don't really have any particular intention of going back to it. However, I don't want to jump the gun too much. Let's talk about this game. Dead by Daylight is a game that's not particularly up my alley, actually. I'm not a big horror fan, despite what a couple of my movie reviews would seem to suggest. Certainly not slasher films. Those are some of the worst to me. It's like slasher and torture porn films are get away from me. I don't want anything to do with that for the most part. It's just not my cup of tea. If it is yours, that's great. However, what interested me about this game and what made me put up with some of the parts of it that I don't inherently like so much about the tone is that it is an asymmetrical PvP game. I am a big fan of asymmetrical PvP. It's interesting to me. I think it's a lot more interesting than typical, PvP, whether that's in an MMO or it's, PvP shooter or whatever. Those don't have a lot of draw to me, but asymmetrical stuff has always drawn me. So I tried this out with my friend Spencer, and we collectively put a lot of time into it. I put more time into it than they did, but that's that's neither here nor there. I think over 200 hours. Hold on. Let me pull this up before I go quoting the wrong thing. But what is my final play time? 231 hours. So I put a lot of time into this over the course of, when did I get it? Anyway, doesn't matter. Yeah, it is an asymmetrical horror game. And boy, I'm really thinking about restarting this video, but I'm going to resist the urge. The objective it is 4v1. The objective of the killer is to sacrifice the 4 survivors, and the objective of the survivors is to start a certain number of generators to power the doors that have trapped them inside a particular area and to escape from the killer. There are a number of mechanics that go into all this that I'm not going to go into detail on too much, mostly because I would not explain them that well and because they should be obvious to anyone who's played it or anyone who wants to play it and can go look up somebody else who wants to explain it better than me. That's not what this video is about. So let me talk about the good things first, or at least the neutral things. I don't hate this game. Let me get that right off the bat. If this has come off as negative already, which I expect it probably has, I don't hate the game, but it is seriously flawed. However, let me get started right off the bat and say one of the things I really appreciate about it, and that I noticed early, and that some other folks appreciated me passing on my view of, was that something I think a lot of the community doesn't quite understand is dying as a survivor or not sacrificing people as a killer is not a failure. Losing and winning matches is not the objective, or not the priority. The game is really a give and take between the two sides. Neither really truly wins or loses. You can have a very good game where you lose from either side. And it's all what you can put into it and what you can get out of it, and you are rewarded regardless of, well, not regardless of performance. You still have to put in some effort, but if you put in some effort, unless something goes dramatically wrong, you're still going to get rewards for it. Now, the game works on a progression system, a rather complex progression system, which again, I'm not going to delve into the details of, but completing objectives, completing small tasks, pretty much everything you do is rewarded with the primary resource for unlocking things, which is blood points. I would say that overall, blood point accrual rates are very reasonable, unless you're on a run of like really bad games where you're just getting wrecked from one side or the other. Each character that you have goes from 1 to 50 in levels. And I would say you can probably upgrade a character from level 0 to level 20, even without seasonal bonuses and stuff. You can do that in a couple of hours. Probably get from 1 to 50 if you just powered through in like a long afternoon or a long day. I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but yeah, you could. So it is not hampered by extremely slow progression. I should say all of my notes on this, are already old. They're already going to be old by the time when this video releases. The notes that I've been taking on this, I don't know when I started this document. I was just checking the B-roll that I have that's going to be running behind this video, and the B-roll was taken in June. Yeah, that should give you some idea of how long this video has been in the works, or sort of in the works, on hold. So if I say anything that is out of date or not entirely accurate, well, it was when I was writing it down. So apologies. Back to my actual points. Both survivors and killers, regardless of which one you want to play. There are some people who only play one or the other. I don't quite understand that. I mean, I understand why you might prefer one to the other, but I think one of the very important things to do is to understand how the other side plays. But anyway, both survivors and killers have a surprising level of diversity in their abilities, and the way that you can build your character as you upgrade them. You have interchangeable abilities that you can use, that you can equip to various characters, and you can really customize a character to play a certain way, to optimize them for a certain play style or for a certain kind of team synergy. And especially if you can play with 4 people, I think it does a really good job of allowing you to do that in a way that, helps you play together. The cast itself is also, nicely diverse. Both, a pretty good mix of races and genders, and it shirks a lot of the typical horror stereotypes. I mean, it plays to some of them, obviously, especially for the licensed characters, but there is a variety there that is certainly a little bit unexpected if you're unfamiliar with the game. And especially given how deeply embedded the horror tropes are, cinematic horror tropes are, Shirking those is really, I hesitate to say admirable, but it clearly took a concerted effort to not just be lazy. So I appreciate that. They've even written a decent chunk of lore for the various killers and survivors. Not something I really delved into, but what little I saw or bothered to look at looked quite good, and I was assured that it's pretty decent from others as well. Like I said, the synergy between builds and characters really lets you serve specific purposes, and likewise, the cross-platform matchmaking is a nice feature that they've had for quite a long time. As if I recall correctly, this game has been out for quite a few years now, and was coming out about the same time as the I've forgotten the name of it, the Friday the 13th game. I think it's actually called. Is it actually called Friday the 13th? I genuinely don't remember at this point, but they were sort of competitors for a while, even though they're quite different in their gameplay. But that's neither here nor there. The cross-platform matchmaking, despite the population of the game, the player base being relatively small, according to Steam charts, it wavers somewhere between like 30 and 50,000 players, which on any given day, which is not tiny, but it's not huge either. So having cross-platform matchmaking really speeds things up. You can turn it off, and I'll get to that. And it can slow things down dramatically if you do. And I think one of the final things is just that in general, the development team, Behavior Interactive, I think is the name, at least in theory, has a good handle on what their community wants. Over the tenure of my playing it, they released more than a few quite in-depth surveys asking what players wanted, clearly with specific questions that clearly showed they already understood what some people wanted, and were just trying to get some clarity or some more detail, or make some give some suggestions of some options of how those things could be remedied, those sorts of things. And for all the other problems, I do admire that they at least have an interest in hearing from their player base and fixing things or adjusting things as they need adjustment. However, we're going to start getting into some of the problems, which is that this is a fundamentally extremely buggy game. It's got bugs all over the place, and they persist for a very long time. There was a sticky rock that you could get permanently stuck on, and would be placed on various maps, not just one map, on many maps. And it was a bug for more than a year. I think it might have been more than 2 years, in fact. I didn't play it that long, but I saw some forum posts that were quite old of why am I still getting stuck on this fucking rock? And that does belie an overarching problem with the development team and their priorities. There is a popular surge behind this game that means that the developer's strategy is not to patch. It is to release new content to make more money, and in the hope that by adding more code, the overall amount of code that is buggy will be diluted. Unfortunately, in reality, every time they release a new patch, it gets buggier. unsurprising for anyone who's written the tiniest amount of code before. So problems take a very long time to go away. There's also some core design flaws to the game, not the least of which is the netcode. The netcode is bad. It's very bad. And hitboxes are very sloppy and lead to getting hit or getting hits, depending on which side you're on, either when you should or missing them when you shouldn't. It's they over my play period, they tried a couple of different things, including tweaking the netcode so that it was supposedly to improve quote unquote overall accuracy of hits. I'm not going to delve into the technical details there, but you can read their documentation. In theory, it should have been an improvement, but there's core fundamental flaws like the tick rate of the servers. Anyway, I digress. I'm not going to get into all that. The netcode is a problem, and it is one of the fundamental flaws you will see pretty much every match you play. Sometimes it'll just be like, I don't know about that hit. Sometimes it'll be like, why the fuck are people warping around? And people do use it to pseudo cheat by using, lag switches and those sorts of things or variations thereof to, basically trick the engine into thinking things happened or didn't happen. Anyway, there's also basically no sound controls in the game, which from a design perspective seems like a good idea in theory, in order to ensure that everyone has a fair experience, that people aren't just like turning off the music so that they can only listen to the sound effects and, not get scared by the spooky music or something like that, because the musical cues are, they are, part of the gameplay. They are core to the gameplay. They're not just an aesthetic effect. However, there's a couple of problems with this. One is that the ranging and stuff on a lot of the sound effects is not accurate. So you will get things like the terror radius and the music kicking in when it shouldn't, or not kicking in when it should, or just not even being mastered properly, to the point where certain killers' music is way quieter, so you don't know they're coming until they're way closer to you. Somebody on the audio team there does not quite understand how to master their music so that it's actually like, there's a difference between just looking at the peaks and troughs in the track and saying, yeah, that's the same decibel level versus, what's the actual what's the perceptible level of the audio for, the human ear. Those are two very different things, especially as they've, over the course of my playing, changed the music and made the music tracks more diverse. A lot of the newer tracks are much quieter just by virtue of they're like more bassy, and so they haven't been mixed to all the again, I'm getting too much into the technical details. And even more than that, there's also the problem of different people's audio equipment. I have a set of really nice headphones, and depending on people's speakers or headphones or those sorts of things, the audio is not, it's a constant problem with game audio, but especially in a game where audio is a core part of the mechanics, you have to get that right. And so not being able to tweak almost any part of the audio at all, other than like a single volume slider, really has a negative effect on the experience. But yeah, there's some ways they could fix that, and some where they've sort of dug their own grave on it. Um, you could also probably run, I've got some audio tweaking software and EQs and things that you could do pass through for to, um, it's always going to be questionable, right? I could spend a whole bunch of time creating an EQ so that I would barely hear the music, or some kind of real-time audio processing to help me cheat if I wanted to, so to speak. So how much freedom do you give versus how much freedom will be given by virtue of making it open to tweaking? Yeah. Anyway, getting away from the audio itself. As much as I said that the matchmaking being cross-platform is a positive, the matchmaking itself is garbage. It is truly awful. And it has literally only gotten worse over the course of the time I played it. Every time cross-platform play was not entirely supported when I first started playing, and it was by the end. And that really exacerbated the problem. But even before that, there was constantly a problem with matchmaking where they are prioritizing speed. They appear to be prioritizing the speed of matchmaking versus the accuracy of matchmaking, where people are not being closely matched based on their rankings. Now, we're going to get into all the problems with the ranking system in a little bit, but just allow me to say that they've rebuilt it, the matchmaking system, several times, and it gets actively worse. And I genuinely cannot figure out how they've screwed it up this badly. However, it does get into the problem of skill level and their core their fundamental metrics for how skill is assessed, which are also extremely wrong. So they're putting bad systems on bad data, which is never going to create a good outcome. So I guess let's get into the players themselves, because it is a very toxic community. One of the worst I've ever played in. Now and again, you have a really good game. You play with some good people. You've got a killer who's, willing to overlook some of the game's core flaws and not abuse the holes in the mechanics or something like that. And you have some really good games. But almost every play session would have, at a minimum, one, if not a whole string of bad games where just people misbehaving. And the game tacitly condones toxic behavior. Let me just get that right off. Camping, if you're playing a killer, camping dead survivors has minimal penalty, even after they tweaked it so that you would get negative blood points for camping someone on a hook or camping a body. That's still it is core to the mechanics. They've basically baked it in, that there's really no penalty for just dropping people and then waiting around for their friends to come get them and then hitting them too. It basically encourages you to do it because it's the most effective way to play. Now, I played killer a lot. I always tried to avoid that. I like, the core idea of a killer giving chase and, not metagaming the tropes of the, invincible killer, right? Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Like, if for any given killer in any given movie just wounded one person and then sat nearby them and then just waited for more people to come and kept hitting each one as they came, that'd be a really boring movie and annoying. And that's exactly how it is in game as well. But effectively, the game doesn't do much or of anything to penalize you for doing that sort of thing. There's a whole lot of other toxic behaviors, lots of teabagging going on, flashing flashlights in people's faces. It's just, being a dick for the sake of being a dick. And lots of people will pass it off as, oh, it's just tactics, or it's, just getting in people's heads. So it's like, can't you just play the game? Do you have to be toxic about it? Like, if you're that good, if you're that much better, if you're playing a survivor and you're that much better than me as a killer, do you have to blink the flashlight in my face to taunt me? Or can you just, beat me? It's wholly unnecessary, but that's where the community's at. It's likewise, you can, the survivors can collude, intentionally or unintentionally, with the killer, to farm their fellow survivors. Basically, if you're being chased, it's plenty easy to do the most basic thing, which is just to run to where there's another survivor and try and get them to follow the other person first. If all you care about is winning because you don't understand the priorities of the game or the tactics, then it's easy to run into somebody else and just be like, here, let me feed this other player to you and make them have a bad time instead of, taking my lumps because I got caught. I won't get into all the different things here, especially because I'm, now months from having played it last, so I don't remember them all that clearly. But there's a lot of problems like that. But it gets into it gets worse. With the number of killers and the number of survivors and survivor abilities and killer abilities, they eventually run out of mechanics to tweak, right? The game is fairly simple. And at some point, you either have to start making things that are objectively better than each other and are just a better version, one is a better version of the other, or you start breaking the mechanics. And that's the problem, is that there are quite a number of killers at this point, and killer abilities, and a few survivor abilities that outright ignore or upend expectations of how the core mechanics of the game work. And this is not the only game I've seen this in. It's just the one that I've seen it most egregious in. The most obvious example is a killer that has an ability that silences their terror radius, or has equipped an item, or has equipped a certain ability that's not even their ability, that silences their terror radius. And if you're expecting a killer to be one thing and they turn out to be another, or vice versa, or, with the survivors, and they just ignore a certain mechanic or behave a way you don't expect or you didn't even think the engine was capable of, I've had more than one occasion where I didn't know a certain killer or something like that, and I literally thought the game was cheating. I thought they were cheating because I didn't think that was a thing in the game. There was an item they added to, I think it was the Plague DLC, or it was Halloween. I don't remember. Anyway, they had an ability that would a consumable item that you could use that would power you up in a way that looked like you were hacking. It didn't make any sense, and I didn't understand. And if something you add to your own game can be mistaken for hacking in your own game, I think maybe you need to consider whether or not that's a good mechanic. But it's widespread. Expecting things to take a certain amount of time, expecting certain sounds, it just leads to confusion for all the players on both sides. And sure, you can meta game, and the more you play, the more you understand. But fundamentally, I think if you undermine your own what appear to be the core mechanics of your own engine, of your own game, your gameplay, then it's sort of start to question what is sacred, or what even is the game anymore if this thing no longer exists. It's kind of bizarre, and unfortunately, I don't think it's something you can really undo without overhauling it entirely. And given that they continue to add more and more content, it's only going to get worse. In that same vein, there are abilities, despite what I just said, there are abilities that are objectively more useful than others. There's a meta, to use terms from other games, of what are the most effective abilities, what are the best builds, what are the best, synergizing abilities, and certain things just never get used. Lots of things never get used because they're just not useful, comparatively speaking. And I get that they're trying to make every character unique, but it really makes the whole thing feel a little bit silly when there's just an objectively better version, or better if only slightly tweaked version of things that are already in the game. To that same end, they're trying to add freshness to the game by adding new content, and obviously it's also a majority probably a money-making endeavor to add new characters that have to be purchased and so on and so forth. But they haven't really considered what seems to me to be the most obvious, if more effortful, option, which is that adding more objective types. Currently, there's only one mode for the game. And there are multiple maps you can play on, but even the list of maps is not that huge. And objectives are very limited. There's only one game type, which is the, power up engines. Power up the same number of engines on every map to open 2 doors to escape. It gets pretty stale pretty quickly. And at that point, you are reliant on the emergent gameplay or the diversity in your characters and the diversity of the characters to mix up that emergent gameplay. And that's obviously a bit of a mess. My suggestion would be to add more modes, or to add a more diverse set of objectives. If the only things really to do on any given map for a killer are to follow the survivors, hit them, and hook them, that gets a little stale. If the only thing for survivors to do is run around, repair generators, and cleanse totems, and try and unhook their friends. I'm being simplistic here, but that's basically what it amounts to. Then, it seems an opportunity squandered to me to, add more diversity, add more objective types. And obviously that gets into its own problems of overcomplicating or distracting from the core mechanics, but I'll get back to that a little bit. To come back to the killer problem and the problem of balance, there is a balance issue. It's not a small one either, but there are a number of killers with a number of mechanics or abilities that not only break the game, but are sort of counter to the core of what the game seems to be. That is to say that, like, they undermine the core gameplay loop. The run, hide, repair, unhook, that loop, where they are too disruptive and sort of undermine the flow. There are a number of killers who you can go up against where even somebody who is not particularly competent with that killer can make it such a pain in the ass to make any progress. And of course, when combined with my other complaints that I had before, can really stall the game out entirely, where it feels like all you're doing is doing your best to tread water, to keep your head above the water while the killer just slaps everyone around. Or makes you do needless errands that just draw the length of a match out and are not any kind of fun. They don't even add that. It's not even that they add more stress. They're literally just a time waster. And again, I think this points towards a lack of a combination of a lack of distinct vision of what the mechanics are and what is sacred. Nothing seems to be sacred in the gameplay. But also, mostly an interest in adding more characters rather than actually evolving the game. Which is a pretty big problem. And this video is getting a little long, and I don't know if I have enough B-roll, so maybe the B-roll stopped at this point. Oops. Yeah. It's a pretty big issue. The game has just a general balancing problem. And the final nail in the coffin to me is really that items and add-ons for the various characters are far too effective. Like, shockingly effective. And yes, you do have to, spend blood points to unlock them, and they are one-time use consumables and that sort of thing. But you get a lot of them. And while also making the problems I talked about before of, upending game mechanics with no clear, no clear reason and no indicator that, oh, this character just doesn't do that now. Or, no longer succumbs to this thing. The items are too effective, and they do not add... They mostly add busy work. They add busy work, or they break the mechanics. For killers especially, the difference between a base level killer with no items equipped and a killer even with the first level or second level of items equipped, not even the third, fourth, fifth, makes a huge difference in their general effectiveness in the game. And I don't want to point to any particular case, because I think it's I played a lot of different killers and a lot of different survivors, and it's pretty universal across the board. that adding items really throws the rhythm off. And it gets pretty irritating. Likewise, for the items that you do unlock, because the blood web as you unlock them is random, and they are one-time use, you could equip them thinking you're going to have a good game, and then if somebody drops the game or matchmaking fails or something like that, you can lose the items. Or if somebody decides to grief, then you're just, well, the item you only get once in your entire blood web is gone. Sucks to be you. There's even an ability that for killers that lets you force items out of people's hands, which is just like griefing incarnate. It's bonkers to me that a lot of those things exist or were okayed at the drawing board level. Yeah. There are, as far as the matchmaking itself goes, there's also no options to avoid certain killers. For whatever reason you may have to not want to play against certain killers, either you don't like their mechanics or the particular IP they happen to be from really rubs you the wrong way. Just as a very personal example, I really do not like the Saw movies. I think they're horrific. The pig is one of the killers in this game. And I have such a phobia of medical stuff that the mechanic where you have to dig in a box of needles really, really makes me want to just, quit a game anytime I have to go up against the pig. And there's no option to avoid it. And especially when you are making a game in the horror, in cinema horror, I think you have to understand as a developer that there are going to be people who don't want to interface with certain, phobias or even may have personal trauma related to certain characters or certain behaviors or whatever. And having no option to avoid them at all, and being penalized apparently they added some new stuff for the penalties to be greater if you do leave a game, but the penalties are already somewhat hefty for just disconnecting from a game. So having the option to say I just don't want to play against this character would be a really nice change. Oh man, I've got a page more. All right, I'm just gonna rattle these off because apparently I didn't sort them well enough and I didn't review my whole document before I got into this, and I want to make this less than an hour long. Some UI elements are not nearly explicit enough. If you haven't already read the wiki, if you haven't run against a certain character before, if you just don't understand, things are not well explained. You basically already have to know what you're up against to even know what's going on. There's tons of icons and tons of abilities and little trigger things that you just don't understand and the game never explains. You have to have either found out the hard way or you have to have looked it up. And there's so many characters that becomes a fairly substantial issue, especially with the hexes and things. If you just don't know, even if you tell me the name of the thing, I still don't know what it does. So thanks. So that needs to be fixed. Maps are varied, but which is welcome, but it is a negative for killers because while you want diversity to, change up people's player experience, there are also killers with mechanics or abilities that fare much better or much worse depending on what map they are playing on. It should go without saying that a wide open map plays very differently than a one with tight hallways and corridors and things. And whether you're a character that warps through things or has a long dash or swings in a wider arc or something like that, having to play on a map that is not suitable for your character, it can lead to a pretty negative experience and can make you have a bad game when you were otherwise doing pretty well. The microtransaction system. Well, there's no surprise there. Every multiplayer game these days has a microtransaction system. And this one is not particularly aggressive, but I don't really understand why it exists at all. Most of the store items are so overpriced that it seems almost self-defeating for them to even put those things up there. But they keep making the content, so I guess it must be paying well enough. Enough people must be buying $10 costumes, there's 3 different currencies. You guys know or don't care. You either already know or you won't care. There's multiple currencies, and converting between currencies and then buying cosmetics is, again, it's not overly aggressive, but it is pretty bad. And being someone who doesn't inherently think that microtransactions or DLC are evil, making them $10 is entirely baffling to me. I mean, they're not all that much, but they're not cheap either. None of them are cheap enough in my mind. Back to the mechanics. The 3 strikes and you're out hook system, where you get hooked a third time and you're just gone, is very limited. Unfortunately, this is completely core to the gameplay, and they would basically have to overhaul the entire game to do this. But it makes it too easy to have a bad game based on other people's behavior, based on something that is either completely or partially out of your control. And it stifles, to my mind, it stifles the interplay between the killers and survivors. It makes the rules of play fairly strict, and if you follow them, you'll do well, and if you don't, you won't. And if somebody makes a mistake, it is very punishing as a result. If somebody unhooks you at an inopportune time or doesn't have enough experience to know that maybe now is not the time to unhook you, it can mean you're 2/3 of the way to death in the first minute of the game. It's a bad system that exacerbates some of the other imbalance problems with, being able to camp hooks and all that jazz. And it doesn't encourage cooperative play. Those 2 things together really stifle cooperation, I think, because the killers are typically not encouraged. As a result, killers are not encouraged to run around enough to really try and make sure they're getting everyone down. They can just focus down one person at a time, and as long as they're doing it at a commensurate pace with the generators being powered up, it's sort of inevitable. It doesn't lead to a lot of the potential interplay I see between, healing, and I'm not saying you have to undo the 3 strikes and you're out thing entirely, but like being able to say as a killer, well, I hooked that person, I can just walk away from them and know that they've got, 1 mark on their death sheet. Really, gets away from my idea of the core of the genre being that like the survivors are scrappy and they have tools at their disposal, and the killer may not know that they've healed or whatever. There's options there for more diverse play, but the system as it is right now is very limited. And yeah, I mean, I'm doing a pretty bad job. I should just throw this fucking video out. It's just been 50 minutes of me rambling. I mean, all this comes together in a pretty poor way, unfortunately. Being unfamiliar with killers, being paired up with people who either are inexperienced or literally, or are, griefing intentionally, or will quit, disconnect from a game as soon as they get downed once, or any sort of thing like that. Like, it just sort of falls apart as soon as you pick at it. And I think that's unfortunate because I think there's some really good ideas here. And I hate to see it succumb to a toxic community and an overly ambitious dev team with incorrect priorities. And I guess that comes down to the last sort of thing, which is that just players are dumb. And that's not unreasonable. That's the nature of the trope of yelling at the screen, "Don't go in the basement," is like alive and well in this game, where players in any multiplayer game are already going to make bad decisions. But when they're additionally faced with fear and self-preservation instincts and all that, like, sure, they're going to make bad decisions, but like as a game developer, you have to develop something that encourages them to overcome that to some extent. Because there's so many games, this game at its core should be about helping your fellow survivors if you're playing as a survivor. But the cooperative aspect of it is so undermined by pretty much everything I've already listed that it really sort of undermines the experience as a whole and feels like it's every man for themselves unless they can, unless you happen to be right next to them or whatever. I'm mangling my words at this point. So the combination of people already just generally being dumb and not having good strategy or tactics in games in general, coupled with those, high level emotions, leads to a pretty bad experience playing with people. And so on the whole, it's pretty apparent that the overarching problem for this game is that it's spun out of control. It's been pretty successful, despite having a somewhat niche community. But its success has gone to the developers' heads, and I don't know anything about their finances, but it strikes me that they must be making quite a lot of money on not a huge amount of development. And my understanding is the team's fairly small as well. In the interest of continuing their success, they've really created if you'll excuse the reference, a Frankenstein's monster of a game, where it's been pieced together over time, and the more they add on to it, the more ugly it is, and the more flawed it is. And it's probably gonna live for a lot longer, just getting uglier and weirder. Unfortunately, I think they've dug themselves a hole with it. It's not to say they couldn't address a lot of these things, but it would take a concerted effort, and especially with a community who is as unfortunate as the Dead by Daylight community is, that would make it all the harder. But at some point, you just got to rip the Band-Aid off. It's a fun game, and while it's imbalanced and bloated and sloppy and buggy and annoying, and has no sign of getting a proper cleanup anytime soon, I still had a lot of fun with it while it lasted. Would I recommend it to anyone now? Probably not. But I like its idea. I liked it for 200 plus hours. And unfortunately, I've gotten to know it. It's shown its true colors, and I don't want to deal with it anymore. So yeah, that's my incredibly far too long and very sloppy retrospective that, I've been writing for 9 months and probably should have written a proper script for. But instead it was just this multi-page document full of thoughts that turned into a bad video. Anyway, maybe I'll put this up and then take it down after a week so nobody has to see my shame. It's a weird game. It's a weird game that I have a lot of thoughts on, and maybe I'll look in on it in a few years and see how it's doing, like an ex. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this way too long video. Let me know your thoughts if you've played the game or not. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Thanks for putting up with it. I've been the Social Solipsist. This has been a video, and I'll see you guys next time.